All right, this is a tough one for me to just be vulnerable enough to explore with you guys, but it's on my heart. And all the social media stuff says we just got to be real and honest, and that's what people look for on this stuff. So I'm just going to be honest and real with you guys. I'm sitting here down here. I mentioned I'm at the Evolution of Psychotherapy conference, and it's been an amazing time. I only went for 2 days, and I'm headed back right now. I'm actually going to go meet a friend of mine in LA, in Hollywood, to hang out with him today. Yesterday we ended the day with a talk about gender. It was from Esther Pearl, she was there with another speaker, and they were talking about the evolvement of gender and this belief about is masculinity having a crisis, right? And so for me, naturally, it was something I was drawn to go check out, because here I am, this therapist that never has had a crisis, I guess, in my own internal world of my gender. I know that I'm definitely a man, but I'm a guy that was raised by a single parent mom, and I've always been in touch with my feminine side, I guess. And I've actually really protested this notion of even calling it a feminine side, but the idea that it's this binary of you're comfortable talking about emotion, you're comfortable crying, you're comfortable being soft, and connection's important to you. The idea that is only set aside for feminine, to me, or for women, and that it's a feminine trait, to me, there's something inherently that's problematic in it of itself. And this idea that in the same way that toughness and strength and resilience, and these are all characteristics that can only be set aside for men, that's also problematic for me too, because so many women embody those things just as well. But it's interesting, because the field that I'm in takes this to a whole deep dive in terms of the rabbit hole of what does it mean to be, what category, where do you categorize yourself as, where do you fit in with all this stuff? And for me, there's a lot of me that just says, I just want to just be me. And, I think, is there a way for us guys? I think this is the crisis, though, that us guys go through, is this crisis of how do we embrace our feminine side and still be men? And even that, why do we have such this importance of I have to hold on to my manliness as I embrace this, right? Because that's something that I guess is part of the crisis for me. So in some ways, I'm just reflecting on that and just kind of wondering what you guys are thinking about that too. I know for men, the whole idea behind going into therapy is that it doesn't matter if it's individual, couples, or family, but the key to your living an authentic existence is vulnerability. And I don't think that's gender specific. I think that you have to be willing to be vulnerable with yourself, with others, spiritually. You have to be willing to be vulnerable in order to grow in any way, shape, or form. So I don't think it's gender specific. And this is just me kind of processing out loud, I guess, my own thoughts. But I think that, again, these boxes that we put gender in is what contributes to, for example, men being afraid to embrace vulnerability because they're afraid that it might come at the cost of their masculinity. What if we just looked at vulnerability as a human trait? What if we just looked at it as something that's vital to meaningful relationships? What if we looked at it as something that was vital to knowing yourself and to knowing the world, as opposed to this notion that it's this feminine thing that we have to embrace? I think a lot more guys would be open to embracing that vulnerability if it wasn't so tied to this gender binary. And I know that's probably deeper than anyone wants to go on this Friday morning, but it's just my thoughts. I think that we could get so far with getting more men to be vulnerable, more in touch with their kids, more in touch with their partners, more in touch with their family, more in touch with their friends. We'd see so much less depression. We'd see so much less anxiety if we just stopped thinking about vulnerability, softer feelings and emotions as this gender binary, this thing that's tied to femininity, that if men want to jump into that, they have to do it at the price of their masculinity. I think you can still be a masculine man. You could still, that doesn't impact your your gender. It doesn't also impact your sexual orientation. You could be a straight guy, but also be really in touch with your feminine side. And I think that's something important to get the message out there to men about, because I do think there is a crisis right now with men when it comes to how we view emotion and how willing we are to embrace different emotions. How many men right now are suffering with problems that they're only dealing with alone because they have this facade that they have to keep it all together for the world? How many men right now are dealing with anxiousness and anxiety and depression and loneliness and some even to the point of being suicidal? But the issue is that they're isolated. And if they could get out of themselves, if they could get out of their own heads, if they could get into a relationship with others, which would require a certain amount of vulnerability, that would allow them, those authentic relationships with others and spiritually, would allow them to be able to really get unstuck. But again, even as we are evolving with our definitions of what it means to be a man, we are still struggling with this notion that those sort of characteristics or traits are gender specific, right? So, I don't know. I have no point of this video other than to say that I had a therapist who once told me, she said, Armando, there's such thing as what I think is an evolved man. And she was a woman telling me this. She had raised a son on her own, just like my mom raised me on her own. And she said, an evolved man is able to still be strong and resilient, but also have times of vulnerability, to have times of being in touch with their softer emotions and express those to the world and not feel ashamed of that. That's the evolved man. So that's what I challenge myself every day to accept about myself. And I think it's not a matter of, for us men, how often you've lived into that evolved male role really dictates how comfortable you are, but it doesn't mean that we all can't get there. It doesn't mean that at the end of the day, like when I look at my little boy and I see how he is now, like he's a boy, people will go, he's all boy because he's tough and he gets hit on the head and he doesn't cry, but he does cry about other stuff, right? So at some point he's going to get socialized, if I let him, to believe that in order to still be this tough guy, he can never let go of that toughness, and he can never cry, and he can never deeply connect. And that's something that obviously, just because I'm his dad, I'm not going to let that happen. And I think that's what we have to do. It starts with us. It starts with the modeling we do for our kids. It starts with how we do relationships. But it starts with the word permission. We have to give ourselves permission into that place. We have to give ourselves permission to feel. We have to give ourselves permission to just be who we are and know that that's not at the price of something else. And so that's my challenge for all of us. And if you guys have had experience with that as a man, I know there's not a ton of men who follow my page, but if you have, share that. What's your experience been with being the evolved man? And if you are a woman and you have a man in your life, what's his struggles that you've seen with him embracing what he considers to be the feminine parts of himself, the softer parts of himself? Or what are the success stories that you've seen in that too? I'm just interested about that topic. Again, I think I'm so sensitive to it because I just have always walked around knowing I'm different. And that difference is just the fact that I personally am. I'm a straight guy that happens to really be, I love people. I love connecting. I love talking about feelings, even if I just met you. And only every once in a while does culture or society make me feel out of place or strange or like something's wrong with me for that. So that's why I'm passionate about talking about it. And yeah, if you end up in therapy with me, whether you're a man or a woman, vulnerability is something that we're going to embrace, because to me it is, like as Brene Brown so often talks about, it is the lifeblood to an authentic living. It's a lifeblood to a quality of life that we all desire. So anyway, whether you're a man or a woman, be vulnerable today, be vulnerable every day, and but let's get out of these boxes of what does it mean. It's just a human thing. It's not a gender thing. That's my take